Hello everyone and welcome to another one of my videos on project management. My name is Edward Shihab. I'm certified project manager, program manager, and portfolio manager, amongst other things. Today, the video is going to be about risk management. My goal from this video is to explain what risk management is, how to do it, how do you identify risks, and how do you, basically, after you identify the risk, how do you analyze it, how do you put it on a risk register? And I'll be sharing with you a copy of this risk register. So at some point in the presentation, watch for the link on the screen. That link is not clickable, obviously, because that's a video. But what you need to do is you need to copy the URL, and then you'll be able to download the template that I'll be sharing for risk management. The template is quite big, so you don't have to use all of it. You can use just the basic functions in it, and that will get you going when it comes to risk management. If this is the first time that you visited my channel and you like the topics of project, risk, portfolio, program management, and so on, check around, look in my channel and see what sorts of videos I have. And if you like these types of videos, then please go ahead and click the subscribe button so you'll be notified when I have new videos of these types. Also click the notification bell, and if you like the video, I would totally appreciate if you can click the like button, and if there are people you'd like to share it with, then please do so. All right, so let's dig into the topic of risk management. Okay, so what is risk? A risk is an uncertain event that, if it happens, would have either a negative or positive effect on your project or initiative. A lot of people confuse risks with issues. A risk is the chance that something could happen, whether positive or negative, right? So when you talk about a risk of fire, you do not mean that we have a fire now. What you're talking about is the chance that a fire can happen. So you can always replace the word risk with chance. Okay, the risk of fire means chance of fire. It doesn't mean that the fire has happened. The risk that an employee would leave means the chance that the employee would leave. It doesn't mean the employee has left. Now, when the employee leaves or when the fire breaks out, that is the issue. So when risks happen, they become issues that we need to deal with. Now, if these are positive risks, we call them opportunities. So for example, you're hoping that the euro goes down in price so that you can buy materials for your project from Europe. If the euro goes down, it's beneficial to you. So if you think that the euro might go down, it means you're looking for that opportunity where the euro goes down, and that's to your benefit. So when an opportunity materializes, happens, it becomes a benefit for you, right? So on a project, we are looking to mitigate, maybe get rid of or minimize all the negative risks or the things that could have negative impacts. And we're trying to capitalize on or maximize all the opportunities that would give us benefits on our project. So a project manager looks to gain from opportunities and minimize the negative risks. Okay. All right. So now that we know that, and we know that the issue is not the same as the risk, the issue is when the risk happens, and the benefit is when the opportunity happens, right? Our goal in risk management is to first identify the things about our initiative or project that could go wrong or could go right if it's an opportunity. Most of the times, our general mindset is, we're defensive. We're trying to find the things that could go wrong, and we want to mitigate them. And that's what the companies are looking for. Your management may simply be looking to mitigate all the things that could go wrong. So it's fine to think about the negative things. All right. So how do you find what could go wrong? I mean, where do you start? If you've been tasked with, analyzing risk, first you need to think about what the project is, what it's about, what are the objectives. So the key thing here is going to be the objective. A project that does not have any objectives, which is unlikely, but a project that doesn't have any objectives actually has no risks. All right. And what I mean is, let's say you were given a project that has endless amount of time for it to be completed, then technically you do not have a schedule risk, okay? Because there is no expectation on when the project needs to finish. So therefore, there is no risk of you missing a deadline or a deliverable date. There was nothing set. When they set a date and they're expecting it, then that's when you have that risk. Now you have a risk, okay? If you were given a project and your management says you have all the money in the world that you can spend on this project, no worries, then you technically don't have any cost related risk. When you don't have any objectives, you don't have any risk. Risks are associated with objectives. So the first thing that you need to do is find out the key objectives of your project. And typically, these are going to be the schedule and they're going to be the budget. There's going to be technical expectations like scope related requirements. And those are the things that you worry about the risk related to. Now, in implementing the project, you will need resources, tools, machines, access to certain things, information. And if these are not obtained, or they're not available when you need them, then that could affect your project, right? So it would lead to either some of the scope of work not being done, or you being late trying to, accommodate or maybe compensate for whatever is missing. So therefore, these are things that you also don't want to have negative events associated with, right? So resources are an area that you look for, where things could go wrong, required skill sets, processes, approvals, permits, logistics related matters. And so there are different aspects of the project where the risk could come from. So once you know what your objectives are, most of these things lead to one of these objectives being affected, right? Either it's going to lead to the schedule or the budget or the scope of the work being impacted. So to identify the risks, the most common way is to maybe benchmark. So if you have access to similar projects, you could look at it. It's like cheating, basically, copy paste. You can see what has happened on other projects, and you can see if you can extract, similar risk, if you can identify these risks that have happened before that can happen on your own project. So benchmarking, or maybe referencing historical records for your organization. I know from experience that a lot of organizations are pretty weak when it comes to documenting. So I don't know that you're really going to find that documentation. And even if they have it, a lot of people hoard that information. They don't really share it. So I'm not really sure that that's going to be your best source. So you might have to resort to other techniques. If you have a team, then maybe you can run a workshop or a brainstorming session, bring everybody in, put up on the screen, write down like what the project objectives are, and or maybe key milestones and so on, and then ask the team to identify risks. So you need a lot of people who are negative, right? Not really. And there are different ways in a group session where you can obtain information. You have to guide it, right? You need to discuss different aspects or modules of your deliverable or project and ask them to identify risks. Mind you, you cannot always identify every risk right from the beginning, because there's a lot of things you don't know yet, right? And some things will materialize later on, or will start to, pop up here and there that would indicate that there's a potential risk. So the identification process itself, it needs to be iterated, it needs to be repeated over and over so that you can identify any new risks. All right, so if you did a brainstorming session or workshop, or sometimes we do a focus group, which is a small group of people of the same background, same discipline, you'll be able to, and especially if they're subject matter experts, you'll be able to extract, risks related to your project. One of the techniques that is maybe fun to use or nicer to use is called affinity diagrams, where you hand out Post-it notes to everybody and you ask them to write one risk per Post-it note. And they can write as many as they want, but only one risk per each Post-it note. Don't make a list on every Post-it note, right? So if somebody has 15 different risks that they're aware of, then they need to produce 15 different Post-it notes. And then you go up to the whiteboard or something, and you start putting these Post-it notes by affinity, by relationship to other similar Post-it notes. Try to group them by what they are. So if you have one, for example, related to legal risks, and somebody else has put one Post-it note related to legal risk, then you can put yours next to it. And then if you have a new topic where nobody has identified a risk in that topic, then you'll put it separately. So over time, once everybody puts their Post-it notes, you'll have nice groupings of different risks that you've identified. So this is called affinity diagram. You could also use mind maps. Let me show you here with a mind map. So you write your project here, and then you can branch it out. So you can say legal matters, right? And then you can say technical. You can put logistics. right? So you write these things here, and then legal will branch out to maybe 2 subsets or 3 subsets, and this could branch out like that. But what would happen is what you're taking is you're taking the whole project here, and then you're dissecting it into smaller pieces, almost like a work breakdown structure. And then in logistics, you can talk about shipping related. So you write shipping, and then you might talk about, let's say, I don't know, vendors. And then you can write about something else. And what you're seeing is you're creating a nice spider web. I don't know if it's a spider web, but you're getting a lot of these branches. So like they're like nerve endings, right? And then at the end, every one of these is going to be a nice little subset that you feel could be an area where you can have risks, right? So logistics, you can talk about payments here, for example. Right? And then in the area of payments, you can say payment processing and maybe something else. And then you say, okay, what could go wrong with that? And what could go wrong with this? So at the very, very tips here, you need to identify what could go wrong. And those are the things that you'll put on your list, right? This can be done in a group setting easily. And, people will find it easier to participate with this, or you can use the affinity diagram that I mentioned. Or you can just, use a prompt list and then ask everybody to contribute with, naming the risks. You can also do document reviews. I typically tend to review every document associated with a project. So this could be contract, if there's a contract, statement of work, it could be a business case. So these are like official documents that I look at, but I'll also look at the team structure, the organizational structure, processes that are documented that I think I will need inside my project. In executing my project, I'll look at historical records also. Anything that is documented, published, an article from the supplier that references, for example, the product that we'll be using or implementing. But anything that I get access to, and I'll review all of these to extract the risks that I can identify. Sometimes contracts are the most important things because you got to watch for language that is used that is great, and that's kind of scary. When sometimes your contractors or other parties, when they write stuff, they write it intentionally vague to their advantage, okay? So you gotta watch for these things. Something that says, for example, all parts or all material must be on site within, let's say, within 1 day of notification. You don't know, there are many things that are not clear about that, like the notification constitutes of what? I mean, what is really a notification? How does it need to be done? And 1 day, is that business day? Is that calendar day? And where on site? And which material are we referring to? So a lot of times you'll find that information written in contracts or even in requirements document and such may not be that clear. And so you need to clarify that information. Okay, in addition to these techniques that I mentioned, you can also interview specialists, experts, management to try to identify what it is that worries them about things that could go wrong. You can review your current environment, how things are being done. You can look at your team, the strengths, weaknesses that you have. You can look at resources that are available to you and try to see if there could be problems in these resources. But these are things that are easier probably to do with a mind map, because you can just branch them out. So one of the things that we can add is team or resources, and then we can branch out to many areas that matter to us, and then have the team contribute risks. So this is how we identify risks. Once you identify the risks, the next thing that you want to do is you want to put them on a risk register. I disagree with anyone that says too much documentation is bad. Too much documentation, maybe too much unnecessary documentation is bad, but when it comes to risk, I can't really think of a better way to remember risks than to put them in Excel sheets, right? So I'll put them on an Excel sheet, list all the risks, and make sure they are valid risks. You don't want just generic things. The most common things that people tell you is supplier could be late, whatever could be delayed, late, delayed, additional cost, work cannot be completed. These are not risks. Something has to happen for you to lose an employee. So what is it that could happen that will make you lose an employee? Something has to happen for you to end up paying more for a product. What needs to happen? Shortage in product? Well, whatever it is, that is the risk that may or may not happen. If it happens, for sure, you'll end up paying more. So basically, try to find the area or the thing that if it happens, you'll have that negative effect. Do not list the negative effect as the risk, okay? List the thing that needs to go wrong for the effect to be felt. So all delays, cost, and inability to do the work and so on, all of these are actually effects. They're not the risk. So you need to look at the cause, and that cause is what you need to mitigate first, right? So I'm going to share with you right now my Excel sheet that I typically would use for risk management. This is my Excel sheet, and this is the template that I'm happy to share with you. I'll put a link. Just watch for it. It's going to show on the screen. It's maybe a shortened link, and you can just, copy it and then download it. Do not click on it. It's not going to work. So on this document here, this is the risk register. You see that I've broken my risks to cause, risk, and effect. And I'll read one example here. And this, I think when I created this was pertaining to a training event somewhere, and we were worried that things could go wrong. So here, let's read the cause. Cause, because trainer drives a long distance to venue, the risk, this is what could go wrong. The cause is typically something that is a fact here. Because trainer drives a long distance to venue, this has to be a verified fact. That's the general condition that gives rise to the risk. The risk is he might face traffic issues along the way. This is the uncertainty. This is the thing that may or may not happen. That's the risk. The effect, if he faces traffic issues along the way, would be inability to cover all material. That's because he will be late. So I could say, trainer will be late and cannot cover all material. Same thing, right? So the cause is the general condition that worries you, that generates this risk, which may or may not happen, which would have this effect if it does happen. Let's look at another one. Because projector is old, projector may break at any time or fail, which will result in inability to deliver the training. We'll look at one more. Because we've never used this component before, I think this does not pertain to training. This is a different one. Because we've never used this component before, the component may turn out to be incompatible. See, all risk statements have the may, could, might, because they are uncertain. May turn out to be incompatible, then the scope may not be deliverable. Due to poor safety measures, all the things that you see in the cause section are facts of your environment. They're not uncertain. What is uncertain is whether these things would happen, and if they do happen, these effects will be felt. All right, so this is how you list your risks on your risk register, and then you could also add which area will be impacted, which objective will be impacted. Remember, I said if you do not have objectives, you do not have risks. So you need to know what could be impacted if this risk actually happens. So you've identified risks, and you can list them all on this sheet. And let's say you were pretty good, you have a team of 10 people and each identified 3 to 4 risks. You could easily put about 35 risks on this list. And that's a lot of risks to analyze. You're not going to be able to mitigate every one of them. So what you have to do is you have to sort them out. So the next thing that you need to do, showing you on the sheet, is to do your qualitative analysis. And in qualitative analysis, number one, you can categorize the risks. And the other thing that you do is you put a probability or impact rating on the risks. So categorizing the risk is an easy one. It depends how your organization categorizes stuff. So for example, I have risks that relate to vendor, and I have risks that relate to equipment, mechanical issues, safety issues, skills related issues. You'll see some of them will repeat. And the value of categorizing the risk is that you'll know where the majority of the risks sit, in which category. And if you feel like you want to outsource that, then you can outsource that whole group under that category. So that's the benefit of categorizing your risks. The other thing that we need to do is we need to assign a probability rating and an impact rating to every risk. Some use high, medium, low, with also very high and very low. I highly recommend that you use 1 to 5, 5 being the highest probability or highest impact. And you can use 1 as the lowest on each side. So I'll show you what this means. If I go here in my sheet to the impact matrix, you'll see I created, let me zoom this. Okay. You'll see here that I created an impact matrix or impact table. All right. So for cost, for example, if I think that something could affect my project by less than 10,000, anything up to 10,000, then I would rate it as a 1 impact for cost. And if it, could have an impact of 10 to 50,000, then it's an impact of 2. So it all depends on what your organization thinks. It depends on the size of the project. Obviously, not all projects are the same size. A $50,000 project is not the same as a $1 million project. An impact of 10,000 on a $50,000 project is felt more than on a $1 million project. So you need to determine the ranges that work for your organization, that match how they feel about risks. And you can do some for cost or for time or for scope. Now, this is good when you have a very highly visible project, very complex with lots of data. So I'd say major projects like major construction or maybe oil and gas type projects. But if you're doing a smaller type project, maybe an IT project, and you want to do a quick risk assessment, I don't know that you really need to put these types of ranges to guide your team, because this is what I'll do. I'll take these and I'll post them up on my screen and I'll say these are the general ranges that we're looking at. If you feel it falls anywhere in there, then give me that rating. But you could also have a quick discussion of the size of the project in terms of budget or in terms of schedule and say, well, then rate it 1 to 5 if you feel it's very low to very high, and then take a general consensus. If you have like 10 people sitting in that team meeting or 5, just ask them to give you a rating of 1 to 5 and take the one that is mostly repeated. So 2 people say 3, somebody says 4, someone says 5, another one says 2. I probably will go to 4. I'll feel like that's a comfortable number to go with. You can go with an average, but it doesn't need to be mathematical. You just need to get a general sense of what people think the risk will be. A lot of times people have a quick answer for certain things, so they'll easily tell you that they feel the probability of something happening is really high, and in that case, you'll put a 5. So if that's a 5 probability and they think the impact is average, then that's a 3 impact. What you'll see is that the probability impact score now shows as 15 and it's red. Let's say they feel the impact is less than average, not really a huge impact, and that's a 2 on a range of 1 to 5. What would happen is that the PI score, which stands for probability impact score, is down to 10. So this Excel sheet that I'm sharing already calculates these things. It's conditionally formatted. You can feel free to edit the range here. All you have to do is go up to conditional formatting, click that, go to manage rules, and then in manage rules, go to edit rule. And you see that it's red when value is greater or equal to 15. That means 15 and above. It is yellow when it's less than 15 and greater or equal to 9. So you can play with this data, and that will give you the red, yellow, green. You can even change the icons if you want. That's totally up to you. But this is the range that I have in there, and that seems to work for me. Now, who really determines that red is 15 and above or 20 and above? That's usually your stakeholders, your management. How fearful are they? How much can they tolerate risk, and that will decide things. So for every risk, you want the team to decide a rating for probability, a rating for impact. Same thing, we rate customer service. But what's the likelihood of something happening? 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. What's the impact if it happens? Mind you, I need to caution you here. A lot of people can be emotionally driven. So sometimes if you talk about an incident that could cause harm, what people think is they go higher on the impact because they're emotionally driven. What you need to remind people is when we are assessing impact, we're assessing impact to the project objectives, the parameters that we are responsible for. Maybe I'm not responsible for company reputation, so don't really score me on that. When I talk about impact on something in my project, it's either the scope, the schedule, the budget, the things that I'm responsible for. Unless the organization says I'm responsible for its reputation, then I can think about that parameter. But for now, most impacts are really either schedule or budget. That's what people look at. Right. So you want to categorize risk, you want to put a probability rating, you want to put an impact rating, get the score, and you'll see that as you score them, some are going to show up in red, some will be yellow, some in green. So if the probability was a 3 here, 3 times 2, 6, it's green. What do you do with red? What do you do with yellow? What do you do with green ones? I'll tell you. For red, you need to mitigate. Okay, you need to find a way to go around these risks, either to fix them, avoid them, or something. And I'll tell you about the strategies that you'll use. So they need to be fixed, and your project plans need to change to reflect what it is that you fixed. If they are yellow, then they need to be actively discussed in your weekly meetings or monthly or whenever you meet for this project, status meetings. That means you don't want people to forget, and you want to watch for either the probability or the impact, is it increasing or not? Because we do find out things later on the project. If they are increasing or changing, then that would affect the score, as you saw on my Excel sheet. The green ones, they are not to be discussed in the meetings, and they are not to be mitigated. For now, they go into a watch list, and you need to assign someone who's an expert to keep an eye, maybe a project assistant to keep an eye on these risks, to watch if the probability or impact is changing. If they do change and they become yellow, then you need to bring them up in the meetings. And if you're wondering when in the meeting, I would say it should be one of your first things that you discuss on your status report. It should be the outstanding risk that probably you need help with, or you want to remind the team about. If it is red, it shouldn't really be discussed. It should have been mitigated. So if anything turns to red, you need to change your plans to mitigate that specific red risk. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. So this takes you to the end of qualitative analysis, and you have the scores. You can sort them, you can go to data, you can sort. I'm not going to do it now, but you can sort all the scores from highest to lowest. And then the next thing that you can do at this point is either try to find resolutions like risk responses or mitigation plans, or you can do quantitative analysis. I don't know that I'm really going to cover quantitative analysis too much, because it doesn't apply to a lot of projects. It only applies to very large projects. But let's say you are a large project. Just to give you a brief idea, if I scroll to the right, under the probability, I now have percentages. It's no longer a 1 to 5 score, and the impact is in dollar values. It's not 1 to 5. That means you actually have to get data, right? For you to know percentages like 90%, or 70 or 10, you need data. If you don't have data, you cannot do quantitative analysis, right? But this is a very basic quantitative analysis where you have data. So if you thought something had a 90% chance of happening with a $30,000 impact, 90% of 30,000 is 27,000. That 27,000 is your expected monetary value, or if you want, you can call it your exposure or your portion of that exposure. I mean, if the risk happens, it is going to cost you around $30,000. But what you're saying is that I'm only 90% likely to face that 30,000. And so I'm going to just calculate that, portion of it, 90% of 30,000, which is 27,000. If I only have a 10% chance of facing that, then 10% of 30,000 is 3,000. So my exposure is 3,000. This is how, life insurance, auto insurance, medical insurance, this is how they work. Otherwise, if they want to account for everybody having a claim, same time, same month, same year, they're going to go broke, right? So they usually calculate this way. But I don't think you need to do this. You can simply work with the highest to lowest score in the PI score. Mainly, you need to treat the red ones. You don't need to treat any yellow or green. So just stick to the red. If all you have is 3 red risks, then those are the things that you treat. If you have more time, more budget, and you feel you want to treat the yellow risk, by all means, start from the highest score to the lowest score, and then keep track of these risks that have not been mitigated to see if they have, magnified over time. Some probability or impacts change. They go up or down. All right. So let's say you did the quantitative analysis. That's fine. And you feel you need to mitigate. Now you need to figure the strategy, whether you're mitigating from the PI score, probability impact score, or you're mitigating from the expected monetary value. This you can sort also from highest to lowest. So you want to mitigate, right? There are 4 options when you want to mitigate. If you look at the strategy here, let me zoom in. If you look at the strategy, you see I wrote mitigate on 1, accept, mitigate, transfer, mitigate, avoid. So most of the times we mitigate, but typically your first action or first response, this is called risk response. The first thing you want to do is avoid. So if, let's say, you were using something from Microsoft in your project and you don't feel comfortable that you've seen a high the team thinks it's high probability that something will go wrong and the impact could be significant on your project, and you decide that, let's avoid that, it means I will not use that product from Microsoft. It doesn't mean I will cancel my project. So I will not use that item from Microsoft. I may go and use something from SAP, from Oracle, from somebody else. But what usually happens when you avoid a risk item is that you create a secondary risk. You don't want to use something from Microsoft, you use from Oracle, or you don't want to ship by sea, you ship by land. You just expose yourself to a new risk. So that's called a secondary risk. And what you need to do is you need to write another line in your Excel sheet, add that risk to it and assess it, right? Because that's a new risk. It needs to be evaluated. You might think it's a lot of work, but once you do this the first time, by the second time you become a pro. Try it and let me know. Mind you, if it's a smaller project, you're not going to have a big team. You're not going to identify a lot of risk, which is fine. Use the same Excel sheet, document what you can, do the qualitative analysis. Don't bother with the quantitative for small projects, and then immediately go into this strategy portion. So the strategy, first try to avoid a risk by replacing with a different option or totally excluding it from the scope. That would be the easiest to do. And that will drop the probability to 0 if you're able to avoid it, right? But assess the secondary risk to see what the level of risk is. If you cannot avoid the risk, let's say we're trying to ship something and we wanted to ship it by sea initially, and we said, no, this could be hijacked or I don't know what. Let's move it to shipping by land. Then let's say we could not do that. If we were able to ship by land, then the problem would have been avoided. But let's say the item is too bulky and it's not recommended to ship by land because it'll just break or doesn't fit on a container, fits only by sea. So then we're stuck to doing it by sea. The second strategy that you want to use other than avoid here would be to transfer, which is this one here. To transfer means to outsource the work or to buy insurance. So if there's a way on my shipment, I can outsource it to somebody else to do it, and they will be liable for anything that goes wrong. I'll pay a price, a premium, they do it. Or I buy insurance. If anything goes wrong, the insurance will cover me. Let's say there is no option for this, then the next thing that you want to do is mitigate. If you want to mitigate, it means you want to reduce the chance that something will go wrong, or you want to reduce the impact if something goes wrong. Either or, right? So you will need technical expertise to figure, how to reduce the chance. If you're shipping product, maybe the way you pack it, or maybe you need to treat the material in a certain way so it doesn't maybe get damaged or get rusted or something from, by shipping by sea, or you want to reduce the impact in case something happens. The impact you could reduce by the padding. You can pad something so that if it moves, nothing goes wrong. But anyways, you'll need technical expertise from people, not from yourself, to see if you can reduce probability or impact. If you can mitigate, that's nice, which is how we treat most risks. If you cannot, you have to accept the risk, which means that there's nothing you can really do. Even when there's nothing you can really do, you can put extra time to that activity or extra budget in case something goes wrong, but knowing that you did not really treat the risk. When you mitigate the risk, remember I said when you avoid, sometimes you may create a secondary risk. Well, when you mitigate, you usually have a residual risk, meaning if you reduce the probability or the impact, you did not eliminate it. That means there's still some remaining risk. For the remaining risk, you need to have a contingency plan or backup plan. Similar to when we mitigate for fire, we usually will put sprinklers, we would build according to the engineering code. Let's say this is construction, and we will put the smoke alarm and fire detector. We'll have the extinguishers and so on. We'll do all the things that we can as precaution, but it doesn't mean by reducing the chance of fire, we can even stipulate that nobody can have live cooking in the building, and that would reduce the chance of fire. But it doesn't mean fire cannot happen. It can still happen, right? Somebody could be, smoking something and then start a fire. So when you mitigate, there's still that residual risk. And for the residual risk, you need to have a contingency plan. So if I show you on my Excel sheet to the right of this, on this side here, the contingency plan right here. So for all the risks that have remaining risk, you'll need to have a contingency plan, which is your backup plan in case something happens. So in case of fire, the alarm goes off, that will be your indicator. And then that indicator tells you you should act on your contingency plan, which is typically leave everything and run down the stairs, do not use the elevators, right? So that's your contingency plan. On this document, what you'll see is that I have here my strategy, which is like mitigate, the cost of the mitigation, whatever it is that I'm going to do to mitigate, how much is it going to cost? What is the mitigation action plan? Like, what is it that I'm doing to mitigate, for example, higher backup? Who's responsible to act on it? By when are they supposed to get it done? And in case this risk still happens after all the mitigation, what is my contingency plan? So the contingency plan is my backup. This is the example with the fire where you run down the stairs. This is what you do. You buy insurance as a mitigation for getting sick and the expenses associated with it. And the contingency plan, when you are sick, this is when the risk became the issue, is to go to the doctor or the hospital, right? So that's the contingency plan. This is what you do when the risk happens. And for every risk that has any residual remaining risk, you need to have a contingency plan. All right. For risks that you avoided, you don't need a contingency plan. Even the ones that you outsource, if the risk happens, there's usually some actions that need to be taken that sits in the contingency plan. Somebody needs to own that contingency plan. It needs to be readily available so we can access it, so we're able to act quickly when the risk happens. All right. The other things that you keep seeing here, like trigger, this is the indicator. So in the case of a fire, the smoke that you see, or the sound of the alarm, or seeing fire, that will be a trigger, and that's when you act on your contingency plan, which is run down the stairs. Okay, so for every risk that you're watching for, you need to name what the trigger is, and the trigger is given to a technical team or monitoring team or someone responsible to keep an eye on whether this trigger has happened. When the trigger happens, they need to notify you or maybe sound the alarm and say, you know, let's act on the contingency plan. So triggers need to be named. All right. Responses, like things that we do to mitigate, need to have an owner and a due date. Otherwise, if you say we need to buy insurance for this in case something goes wrong, and you do not buy the insurance, you don't assign anybody to it, then the moment it happens, well, too bad. Now you're going to have to pay full price because you never bought the insurance. So all responses or mitigation plans need to have an owner and a due date, need to be acted upon. They will all come at a cost. There's a cost to doing these things. And if you want it to be really, really professional and you're doing quantitative analysis and you have like percentages and dollar values, then these should reduce on the new post mitigation evaluation. Let's say you mitigated the impact, not the probability. That means probability remained at 10%, but impact has been reduced to 500. Maybe that's a deductible amount that you would have to pay. And your new expected monetary value is $50. It used to be $3,000, now it's $50. Cost of risk response. This says $35,000. Obviously, that's not realistic. It could be something like maybe $400 or something, because you have to size it up, right? Whatever the risk is, you're going to pay a percentage of that as a cost of treating it. You're not going to pay more than what the risk is. So the risk response is commensurate with the impact, right? So if you are tracking, you know, quantitative, then you want to see post mitigation. What is my new reduced level of risk? And you can add them up. Like if you add off your expected monetary value on this column here, you'll see that it goes all the way down. This is the value, 654,000. This is if I add all these, right? And let's say I spent all this money to treat it. I have the total down here. I spent 115,000, and you'll see in my new risk response, my new expected monetary value. If I add these up, you'll see that it is 228,000 here. So that means my exposure before was 654,000. I spent 115,000 to treat this, and I dropped the risk down to 228,000. At this point, it's really a business decision on whether that's worth it. But I don't want to dwell too much into this because this is really for a larger project, and you know, I'm trying to help you do the very basic of risk management. So let's go past these numbers. So let's say we mitigated, or we avoided, or we transferred, as I mentioned here, and we put the cost of mitigation, we put the warning sign for, you know, risk that remained with us, or residual risk, and we put the action plan for how we want to mitigate, who's going to do it, by when, Mind you, all these are going to add to your project cost and activities. You got to add them on there. And then for any risk that is remaining, we document what the backup or contingency plan is and who has that plan, and who owns it. So where's the location of the plan, and who's the owner of it. The reason you want to put a contingency plan owner or backup plan owner is that's the person that comes up with a process or is the custodian of this specific contingency plan. So if it's an insurance policy, who has it and who owns that? Like, who owns the responsibility for that? Beyond the backup plan, there's also fallback plan. So sometimes things go really wrong and your backup plans don't work. So you thought you could run down the stairs when there's a fire, but then you find out, you know, the fire is at the door, so you really can't run down the stairs. So what's your other backup plan? So you can run through all of your backup plans, but there's something called a fallback plan, which is a worst case scenario. Worst case, if all else fails, what do I do? This is something you should be able to plan in advance. For example, we could always break the window, jump out the window if the window is not that high, or try to see if the wall is the type that can just be torn down, broken down, whatever, right? So what is your worst case scenario, your fallback plan? And then there's something called workaround. Workaround is not something you can plan now, but will be filled in or documented later if your fallback plan fails, right? Fallback plans are worst case that you can plan, but those could also be impossible in certain instances. And whatever you had to work around find as a workaround at that time could be something that you want to document in the future. So you'd write it there. So you're not going to be able to identify it now, but you'll fill it in later. All right, so this is how we mitigate our plans. All mitigation plans need to be approved by your sponsor or management because they come at a cost. Okay, and they change your project plans, they change due dates, you know, sometimes we add time, we add budgets and so on. Now, as the project starts to happen, you need to continue to revisit the risk register. You can do that every week, you know, quickly with the team and say, do we know of any risk? Or maybe create some sort of a channel where the team can notify you whenever they identify a risk, maybe using a specific email so that you can update the risk register and reanalyze. All the identification, qualitative, quantitative, risk responses all need to be redone. Not the risk responses, but the assessment of the severity of a risk needs to be iteratively done. So you got to do this every so often because some increase in intensity, some reduce, some are cleared up because they happen, or some, you know, you cross the phase where they could actually happen. So you can remove them off of your list, and that means the remaining risks are even less. But as a risk happens over time, when a risk actually happens on your project, then you can document it here. Did the risk happen? Yes, no. But yes, was the risk response effective? You know, you can say yes, no, not at all. Actual risk impact, what did it really cost you when the risk happened? What was the cost of treating the risk? What lessons did we learn to benefit future projects? Is there something that we need to make standard or policy inside our organization? So those are lessons learned. It's good to capture that now and put the person who really knows a lot about this specific risk. This could be the risk owner, could be a specialist in that specific, you know, product or domain, but that would be a good source to discuss with the risk in the future. So all the things that you see here, work around all the way to this, these are things that you do on an ongoing basis, right? And you just keep updating it. I would suggest that at the end of every phase, you can mark some of the risks as whether they happened or not, and what lessons did you learn and who would help out in the future if we need to ask more questions about this specific risk. This risk register, if you follow this risk register, it becomes a nice organizational asset. You know, they would benefit from this, and if they can keep saving information from different projects, maybe add a column on the very far left here before you put cost. Maybe you write, you know, the year, the name of the project, then the type or category of project, and then save that information that way, so that whenever you have a project in the future, all you need to do is look at that type of project and see what similar risks we've had in the past. And you can also see if the risk happened or did not happen, what was the impact, how was it mitigated, and so on. That would save you time and money going forward. All right, so that's all pertaining to that risk register. And I hope you found it meaningful, useful, and I hope you've developed some motivation to using a risk register. That was my goal from this, to try to educate people about risks. And if you're still hesitant to use such documents, just remember that not all projects come in the same size. There are small, medium, and very large projects. For smaller projects, you need to tone it down. The effort that is required is going to be less. There's going to be less pieces to the project, less to actually analyze, probably easier to handle. Just attempt it on your next project and see what happens. You can even leave me a comment if you try to use it and say, you know, this is what I did, this is where I struggled, and you'll see that I'll be happy to actually respond to that and let you know what you can do as an alternate or maybe a different way of doing this. But you should analyze the risk, because a lot of times we make promises on schedules or budgets or, you know, deliverables. And if we had looked at the risk, we would not have made those promises. We would have adjusted them a bit so that they are easier for us to deliver. In the end, as a PM, I don't want to be a failure. I want to be a success. So promising things that I cannot deliver or being too optimistic is not going to do me any good. It's just going to make me look bad in the eyes of management. So I'd rather be cautious than look like a failure to my management. You should try it. Try it. Let me know, and hopefully it changes your perspective on risk management. I don't know if I covered everything, but this is a pretty long video, and I think I need to bring this to an end. I want to thank you for watching this. If you appreciate it, there's different ways that you can show your appreciation. Number one, click the like button. If you like my videos, you like my style, then subscribe, hit the notification bell, and watch for future videos. And please, visit again. Let people know about this channel if you think it's useful to other PMs and so on. Maybe they would like it. And if you're feeling generous, YouTube added a feature for you to send thank yous, financial, and obviously I would totally appreciate that. That would support the initiative. I plan to do more. Besides this, I already have other ones on how to create a project charter that you can access, but I plan to create these other templates and discuss them. So like requirements management, requirements document, maybe, I don't know, you tell me which ones should I create videos for, what tools or which areas of project management you wish you had a template for and knew how to do. Like, is it a communication plan? Is it a status report? What is it that you're looking for? Give me ideas in the comment section, and I will consider these and give them a higher priority so I can create my next video. That's all for now. Thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you on my next video. Please let me hear from you. Any comment that says, hey, I like this, or I wish you discussed this more, I'll be happy to hear from you. Take care now. Bye-bye.